Hello and welcome everyone to today's event. The topic is underscoring the importance of zero trust in modern organizations. Thanks so much for joining us on this PanelCast event produced by Actual Tech Media. We want to give a special thanks to our sponsors and our experts who will soon be joining us here from Rubrik and Strong DM. We're going to have a great discussion lined up for you today. I want to mention briefly the format of this event. We solicited your questions. We asked for your challenges around zero trust on the landing page, and we gathered all those questions. You all had many, many questions about zero trust, and this event will be dedicated to answering all those questions that you submitted. So this is going to be a lot of fun, very educational. And before we kick it off, there's just a few things that you should know about the format. Of course, we encourage your questions. They're in the questions pane of the audience console. We have the questions from the landing page, but if you have questions that come up during the event, don't hold back. Use that questions pane to ask your questions, and we'll be getting to as many of those as we can during the event. We also have a couple of handouts there in the handouts tab of your audience console, one from Strong DM and one from Rubrik. We encourage you to check those out. Those are some great resources, especially the PDF there you can download is a full ebook. And the topic is Zero Trust Data Security for Dummies. Make sure you get that. And of course, make sure that you visit the Strong DM link there, which will take you to details on the Strong DM infrastructure access platform. For additional information, details, capabilities, make sure that you check that one out as well. And then at the end of the webinar, I'll be announcing the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card prize. Of course, if you're watching this on demand, recorded, the drawing would have already occurred. The prize terms and conditions can be found there in the handouts tab of your audience console as well. And I suppose I should mention, my name is David Davis from Actual Tech Media, and I'll be serving as the moderator. All right, so with that housekeeping information out of the way, I'm excited now to welcome today's expert presenters. First off, Alex Kokinos, Senior Solutions Engineer from Strong DM, and Murthy Mathiprakasam, Senior Director of Product Marketing at Rubrik. Alex and Murthy, it's great to have you both on. I'm looking forward to our conversations here and getting all these audience questions answered, educating them on the value and benefits of zero trust. But before we do, just a few quick stage setting slides here. Starting off with a definition. What is zero trust? For those out there who aren't quite sure, maybe they've heard the term, they've seen it in their email inbox, but they're not really sure what that means exactly. Kind of the dictionary definition that I found when I looked it up was zero trust assumes that there's no traditional network edge. So like back in my day when I was an IT manager, we always said we wanted the hard outer shell of the network, but we kind of accepted the soft gooey center like an egg. And so we had the perimeter firewall, we protected our perimeter, but zero trust assumes there's no more perimeter. There's no more traditional network edge. And I know there's a lot of different definitions of zero trust out there, but I've found it interesting. There is a standard. The National Institute of Science and Technology has a standard 800-207 that attempts to define zero trust as three things. One is it provides continuous verification, which means you always verify access all the time for all resources. There's no assumptions. There's no single authentication and then you're in. That you limit the blast radius means you minimize the impact if there's some sort of external or insider breach that happens. And then finally, automate context collection and response. And what this means to me is that you're gathering information from all the different pieces that make up the IT infrastructure in order to provide the most accurate response. And everybody out there in the audience might be saying, well, that's great, but why should we care? Well, the stat here is that more than 80% of all attacks involve credential use or misuse in the network in some way. So that's why we should care. We want to keep out these malicious attackers, prevent these ransomware events that are happening like crazy. And that brings us to our first audience question. And that is, what's your company's point of view on zero trust? Basically, what's your take on zero trust? That was the industry definition. But Murthy at Rubrik, what do you take? Or what do you say?
No, thank you very much. And thank you again for having me on today's webcast. So, I think there's a little bit of jadedness in the industry too, because this term has been around for a while. And so I think a lot of people wonder, well, is everybody just defining it for their own, selfish purposes? And does it really have any kind of concrete meaning? I actually don't think it's entirely, there's maybe some of that going on, not to be overly positive about it, but I do think there's actually some good reason why the definition has expanded over the last couple of years. And a lot of it, I think, it has to do with that. It's kind of started off as this like philosophical concept that it's about, exactly like you said, don't assume the network edge, don't, rely on perimeter security. There's a whole number of reasons why that model just simply isn't relevant anymore. Going into the sort of second decade of the century, that just the way that users are much more distributed. They don't all sit in an office, or like just fundamentally, it's not just employees. You just have this kind of distributed user landscape on one hand. You have a distributed service landscape in terms of where applications, data all reside, and then all of that is sort of being attacked through kind of distributed threats as well. And so the fact that the world itself just got way more complicated is actually one of the reasons why the definition itself has expanded over the years. So I'm not avoiding your question. I'm just kind of setting myself up for the question. Where I think a lot of vendors have done is they've kind of attached to certain pieces of this expanded definition, right? So, I think one way to think about that edge is to think about securing users, thinking about access and privilege management. I think my co-presenter is going to talk a lot about that. Where Rubrik fits in is actually on the other side, which is more on the service side, which is to say that given that you're going to have users accessing your company's most important critical assets, applications, data, infrastructure, how can we keep those assets as secure as possible, given this new kind of world landscape we're in, where the users are distributed, where services themselves are not all in one place? How can we help ensure some resiliency for that? And thinking about that is more than just like a better firewall, so to speak. Originally we had these kind of perimeter-based solutions for solving the problem, but now there's a whole kind of portfolio of solutions that you need to really address the problem. Specifically what Rubrik does and where we fit into this is we're a provider of data protection and data security solutions. So we essentially are a kind of next generation sort of backup solutions you can think of. So we keep copies of all your data, all your kind of infrastructure set up, your applications in a secure location. We use zero trust principles in how we do that, but it also enables this kind of next generation of resilience, which is also all part of this. And so I know we're going to be talking more about it, throughout the rest of the webcast, but basically that's kind of how Rubrik fits in and how kind of our point of view, it's not that it's different, but I think it's sort of part of this more expanded view that's sort of evolved over the last couple of years.
Excellent. And what's your take, Alex, at Strong DM?
Yeah, and of course, thanks for having me as well. So I'd actually love to expand on one of the pieces that Murthy talked about. I think when you are associating that philosophy, the way that zero trust starts with this philosophy, but then I think what you're really implying is that philosophy only takes you so far. You have to expand it as the threat model changes over time, So, but it is a great philosophy to start with. So where Strong DM fits into that, we are an infrastructure access platform, and we help you access infrastructure that doesn't always feel very zero trust compatible. So you think about I used to be an SRE, a site reliability engineer. So I've had these jobs where I've been sharing database credentials around, sharing like break glass keys for SSH. So, our view of zero trust is that it's really the core of our product. It is what makes our product have value. So these practices, we would say they empower our customers to solve business pain, to increase their efficiency, and reduce the risk of compromise. And we're also really rejecting the idea that zero trust has to feel complicated for administrators and end users. So we're saying, this is gonna work around people. Like we put on our website, we're people first, and that's like a real philosophy that we have, because one of the worst things you can do in security is come up with a process that is just such a pain that people want to go around it. People don't want to do it. We think that this can be really a win-win. Like, we think that this could save you money on cost. We think this could make your developers happier. And we think that we can reduce your risks and answer all your auditors' questions. So I think as we talk more about zero trust, we'll definitely get into like, why does zero trust do all these wonderful things?
Excellent. Great answers, both of you. Let's keep this moving. We've got a lot of great questions to answer here. I'll just move on to the next one. Question number 2 here. What are the benefits of zero trust? How important really is this? How beneficial really is it? Especially for companies of different sizes, small, medium, large. Is it more important for one size of company or one vertical than another? I'll hand that first back to you, Murthy.
Okay, yeah. Now, it's a good question, and I think it's related to the definition question in a way, because it's great to just like know the dictionary definition, but like, does it matter, or how much does it matter? It's always a good question. I think, Alex, he kind of leaned into a little bit of this too, which is two of the biggest dimensions that are ways to think about the benefits of zero trust are, again, the risk dimension, just as Alex was saying. The fact that the threat model, the threat landscape has evolved so rapidly, particularly in kind of this post-pandemic era, that there's just like a massive rise in cyber warfare. And then even just as users are just, more distributed, there's just more accidents that happen, or people just like leave passwords open, they're sitting in a coffee shop, that kind of stuff. Like the probability of bad things happening has just gone up dramatically. So reducing risk is a key benefit of zero trust. The second benefit, I think, is also that, there's this whole notion of don't assume trust, assume breach, which is that no matter how hard you try to prevent bad things from happening, inevitably something's going to fall through and you're going to have to respond. And so focusing more on incident response and incident response time, I think, is another benefit of zero trust, because essentially as the world has become more and more digital and the business just relies on digital services across the board, every single hour of downtime, every minute of downtime has extremely high costs for all the reasons Alex was referring to. It's not just like the direct fact that you can't process transactions and those kind of things, but like there's regulatory costs. The regulations have like dramatically increased in this space just in the last year or two, just because governments are leaning in more into the problem, and they're not just, giving a free pass to enterprises. They're expecting enterprises to actually have their act together, which is another reason why zero trust is important, because the idea of reducing risk and shortening downtime is not just a selfish motivation in terms of your own profitability, but it can have, these broader compliance kind of impact as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Alex?
Yeah, in addition to everything Murthy said, I think there are some benefits, and, again, kind of thinking about that dictionary definition that you gave us, something that StrongDM has in our own little zero trust. We have like a little ebook that we've got, and it talks about segmentation, visibility, and granular access control. So it's kind of related to those 3 pieces that you showed on that slide, or they're synonyms for it. So it's like, you're gaining visibility. You're by default, everything that's happening, all your traffic is being logged and inspected. And that means you can automate and respond to incidents, or detect incidents easier, or detect suspicious activity. It doesn't even have to be an external breach. If you allow somebody in the door of your company and you just trust them to, be honest, that's, of course, like I said, I've worked on these infrastructure teams where the old way of working was sort of like, well, the infrastructure team, they're like the trusted, they know what they're doing. They've got the keys to the kingdom. And I think that way of working is kind of, it's not going to work anymore. So it's sort of, what are the benefits here? Well, obviously those risk reduction things. But I think counter to a lot of people's intuition, it can reduce complexity, like especially if you have multi-cloud or hybrid environments. If you're one of those companies that's like, we have 10,000 VPNs and all my users have to figure out what network to get on, this is a way where if you think about maybe getting into things like software-defined networks where we're thinking about things more logically. Like I'm this user, I'm Alex, I'm an engineer, and because I'm an engineer, I can access these specific resources or what have you. Like that philosophy, it's empowering from a security perspective because you have things in the background that are using sophisticated techniques to actually verify I am who I say I am. You might have cryptography involved. You might have like anomaly detection, whatever kind of stuff there is, all that stuff that I don't really understand. And then, on the user side of it, it's like, wow, like I don't have to care what network I'm on. I'm not really on the network. I mean, they shouldn't let me in the network anymore, really. And that was kind of my thoughts about it. I think Murthy already mentioned the compliance bit. So, easier to be compliant with regulations, because you're already monitoring everything and you're responding to it.
Smart. I like that. Kind of assuming that connections and users are, untrustworthy until they've earned that trust, and that sort of makes sense, really, when you think about it. Even just dealing with people in the real world, you don't assume everyone's trustworthy. You kind of have to prove that you're trustworthy, and so that's almost what we're doing here on the network. Let's move on. Next question here. I want to direct this first to you, Alex, at StrongDM. What vulnerabilities does Zero Trust really defend against?
Yeah, one of the big ones we talked about, and this, I'll have to speak maybe in bits and pieces because it is such a broad topic, but some potential ones that, can help. We just talked about at the beginning of this webcast, the idea of 80% of breaches involving credentials, credential misuse, and things like that. There was actually an incident earlier in my career where there were some credentials that got leaked. And, we weren't following those practices of least privilege. We were trying to have, easy developer workflow. And these credentials leaked. And it caused people to be able to actually get into our systems and spin up Bitcoin miners and stuff like that. Really that full, I'm in your network, I'm in your account, therefore I'm in, they let me in the building. Whereas Zero Trust is more like, all right, you've verified you are who you say you are, and now we're not letting you in any part of the building. We're going to escort you to your office or something like that. So, if we had more of a Zero Trust practice, maybe we wouldn't have given out credentials at all. And of course, as I mentioned, that's something StrongDM does, is like our whole goal is to never give you credentials ever. It's more about I'm allowed in, because I proved I am who I say I am. So that's one of the vulnerabilities, in general, that big credential one, that's a huge one. I had a couple other things written down here, but I've lost my place in my own notes. So maybe Murthy can chime in.
Absolutely. So that's why it's good to have multiple speakers. You can kind of pass the ball as you need, No, I mean, obviously, I agree with a lot of things that Alex said. I think this goes back actually to the first question about, what's even the definition of a vulnerability? Just to go back to how do you even think about these things in the right way? Because, in that kind of spectrum of philosophy to brass tacks, like really specific and tangible things, I think organizations are just dealing with vulnerability in a fundamentally different way as well. So just at the highest level of having just your information services and users just getting attacked more, just at the highest level, that in and of itself, Zero Trust can help just mitigate the possibility of being attacked just at the highest level, right? And being able to withstand that attack. So like in Rubrik's case, the fact we actually have a backup of all your critical data and applications, that just by having that secure backup is itself a hedge against this new sort of threat landscape. But then when you get even further lower into like specific capabilities, specific vulnerabilities, so things like, we're talking about the compliance point. So like, for example, we scan all the data once we've backed it up for sensitive data, because, this sensitive data is a fairly established sort of concept. There's regulations that determine what's sensitive or not. And just, industry kind of versions of things. And what does it mean in healthcare or in finance? But like, we can kind of proactively scan for these things and tell users, hey, you've got data like sort of living in the wild somewhere that you may not know about. Why don't you go preemptively take that out of the wild and put it in a more secure place? And so that way, God forbid you are attacked, we've at least helped you kind of mitigate the risk again, that the impact of that attack is going to be relatively minimal. And you don't have sensitive information sitting somewhere where it's just more easily accessed or more vulnerable to compromise. A second example of the kind of a brass tacks type of capability is, even beyond just the information assets, like just from a process standpoint, being able to actually test your incident response plans. Like, we're talking about like, don't assume anything. That goes for like even your process and your people. Like, you can do all these like training sessions and make sure that everybody knows what to do when they get attacked. But like, you got to actually practice this stuff, or else you'll end up kind of figuring out, it's like having a fire response plan, but waiting until your house burns down to like see if it works or not. Like, you would never do that. You want to be like preemptively doing these things. So like in our platform, we actually have ways to automate that process as well, so that you can actually run those types of testing and validation and simulation in a faster way. If you can do it faster, it means you can do it more often. That means you're just becoming more resilient from a process standpoint. So vulnerability exists across kind of, from a philosophical kind of posture standpoint, all the way down to like just specific information assets and processes. And I think that Zero Trust has ways of actually supporting all of those.
Yeah, well said. And like you pointed out, there's multiple forms of vulnerabilities. There's the kind of the CVE security vulnerability, but then there's a whole broad, list of vulnerabilities out there that this is designed to protect us from. So let's move on to question 4 here, and that is they're asking, with increasingly distributed and hybrid workforces, how can Zero Trust help protect critical assets from unauthorized use and access? Murthy?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. I think because this is the inevitable world that we're in right now, and it's hard to like forecast, 5 or 10 years out. But like, imagine where we were 5 or 10 years before, and like that's the kind of level of complexity, as I think we were talking about earlier, that we're kind of heading into. It's, especially with mobility, with work from home, there's just so many patterns of how authorized users are getting access to authorized information services, that being able to secure that pattern is just becoming increasingly complicated. And so it's exactly, kind of like as Alex was saying, particularly in this like new software defined world that we're in, this is actually exactly why these sort of Zero Trust technologies matter even more, because you basically can't manage this complexity just through human labor. It's just physically impossible. There are just too many people in too many places. There's too much data and applications in too many different places. And like trying to actually think about all those connections, and it's dynamic and it's changing too, because it's not just a matter of like exactly to your example about a person in an office. Like, the context can change whether a person should have access to a particular kind of service. And so there's all kinds of sort of dimensions to actually thinking about the problem. So Zero Trust helps because it kind of takes you from a very manual and reactive posture of like thinking through every one of these connections to a more systemic and automated sort of posture of how you think about these things. So rather than actually having to know, do I let Fred, the employee, have access to database XYZ, you can be thinking about these at a much more policy level, or kind of more abstracted level, so which makes it easier to manage. But then the actual grunt work of like making sure the right people are getting into the right things is kind of offloaded into software and technology. So this is where software has always helped, in any kind of domain. But Zero Trust particularly, I think, is basically helping you deal with the complexity of the environment that we're all inevitably in already, and it's going to get worse, as time goes on. But it sort of makes it scalable, because like, if you have to figure out a way to keep the risk lower and to make sure your downtimes are shrinking. And so if you don't lean into it, both of these factors just keep getting worse and worse. So I think that's the way to think about zero trust in terms of the distributed work. It's like the problem is going to get worse and worse inevitably. So are you going to like lean into a more proactive and automated stance so that it doesn't literally increase risk and increase downtime for your organization?
Excellent. Alex, what's your take at Strong DM?
Well, my take, and another set of great points there. I'd love to bring it back to like visibility, granular access control, and segmentation. So, you think about what it means to be a hybrid environment. It's not just people are working at home, or we have offices all over the place, or 3 days a week. It's more than that. You think about, well, I'll start it off with a story because I like stories. So my first job in my career in IT, I joined this company, and my coworkers told me at the last office we were in, we had our very own offices, and they locked. Like, you could lock the door, and it was actually a requirement. Like, that was, one of your safety measures for security, IT security, was your door is locked physically. So it was really, imagine how badly that would work today. Like, it's crazy, but I've even heard from some colleagues of mine that, people will go into the office after like being gone from the pandemic, and they're realizing that like, wow, my access is a little different just because I'm in the office and because I'm not at home. And that kind of stuff really, really needs to go, and it really needs to move to that zero trust model. And you think about like, even before this new world we're in, with a hybrid workforce, that also means things like individual projects or contractors. Like, we're talking about zero trust on a network level or like a technology level. But going back to philosophically, if you're going to let somebody in your house to do the plumbing, or as a company, you're going to let a contractor in to do a project for you, or you're going to trial a product from a new vendor that you're trying out. So you want visibility. You want all traffic logged and inspected. You want that granular access control. You don't want to give out any type of permission that goes beyond the scope of this project and the timeline of this project. And then segmentation. When you're doing this workload, there shouldn't be a chance of affecting a different workload. So absolutely, I think the more, and again, maybe it sounds a little complicated, but I think if you're already in sort of this hybrid workforce, or the more complex your situation, the more this makes sense, and the more that it becomes a liberating idea, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you make a great point there. You hire a new consultant, and you're not just like, thanks for coming to help us, do some coding. Here's the root password. Go ahead and get started. You need to provide granular level access just to the things that people need, and don't assume trust. Next question here. How do you actually do this? How do you implement zero trust? What can we do to minimize the impact during implementation? I hear that zero trust is not just a checkbox. Is that right, Alex?
Yeah, that's right. And, to be honest, like, I think from my perspective, I'm not going to be able to give you that answer of like step 1, 2, 3, here's how to do it, because, it's a big holistic thing. And it's going to vary based on who you are, because some organizations have components that other ones don't have, or you have risks that other people don't have, or you have compliance that you need to meet that other people don't have. So it is a little bit daunting as a concept, but I think how you implement it, keep the glass half full, because I am really a firm believer that like this daunting complexity is not inevitable. So I think zero trust is actually an opportunity to make things easier for your employees. So, and of course, like, again, for more shameless plugging of Strong DM, like, that's one of the selling points of our product is like we really want it to be like this easy thing for employees. And it's really funny because you know, on us, you know, as somebody who's on the sales team, and I'm actually pretty new to sales. You know, I've been an engineer, and so as an engineer, I've been, you know, I'm always thinking about like what's going to be easy for me as an engineer, and it's something where it's interestingly difficult to convince people, like, you know, when you're choosing your solution, you know, don't just look at how much it costs, or don't just look at, you know, XYZ. Make sure it's makes sure the lives of your employees really better, and like, oh, it's really easier for me to get my job done. Now, of course, you can put a dollar value on that. You can, you know, we even have ROI calculators for like, hey, we've saved a bunch of time from I need to request access and get access. But yeah, I think, you know, when it comes to implementation, our product, you know, it can be a couple weeks, you know, not like months and months and months. But understandably, you know, there's so many facets of zero trust that you might have some implementations that are a real project. I mean, you know, I'm not going to sugarcoat that, I guess.
Very nice. Murthy?
Yeah, you know, I think, and you know, I'm kind of coming back to the same framework of this, you know, philosophical to versus, you know, real tangible kind of things, where I think some of the implementation challenges like are solved just literally again by using vendor solutions. And obviously, you know, Alex and I have an interest in making that point, of course. But like, I think one of the biggest pitfalls organizations take is like when they try to do all this stuff on their own in general. And so like a lot of this stuff, not just, you know, the solutions we're talking about today, but a lot of this is actually already pre-engineered, prefabricated. And so there's a lot of work that as an end user organization, you could just take off the shelf and you're already there. And so, you know, like we provide, you know, the secure backup solution. I always see companies that are trying to like kind of make their own versions of these things. And like, we've got smart engineers, we like figured out a lot of this stuff. So just take advantage of all the best practices that we've already hard coded into the product. That's one way to just accelerate your journey, is just to use, you know, these prepackaged solutions. But then beyond that, you know, from a kind of a non-technology standpoint, which is where actually a lot of organizations struggle sometimes. One point, or there's sort of 2 points I would make. One is you have to kind of define business policies and priorities, which is something surprisingly, you know, especially the deeper you go into IT organizations, that construct isn't something that's very familiar. And like we were talking a lot about, you know, securing users, securing information assets, but like there's a reason why you're doing that, and you got to kind of have a sense of what the purpose is. And it's very, very contextual to the industry you're in, the size of company, as you mentioned, but like what like information assets actually matter and what's the priority of why they matter. Because even as you think about implementing zero trust, you're probably not going to just go and do it across the board. So how are you thinking about priority? Or even as you're thinking about incident response plans, maybe you're going to like bring back certain data and applications first. Do you even know what that would be? And so kind of like thinking through just checklists and priorities of what matters to your business, as simple as it sounds, is something that oftentimes gets overlooked. The second thing is, as I mentioned before, testing and validation. Like a lot of people kind of like say, oh, I've put the zero trust stuff in place, I'm done. But it's not a matter of that. There's a continuous validation and testing aspect to this, to making sure that like you've tried to actually simulate attacks and actually tried to find vulnerabilities on your own, so that it's not the malicious guys doing it for you. And that's something that you have to invest in, because most of the time it's going to come back saying you're fine, right? It's literally like when we were in school and they would make us do, you know, the fire drills and stuff like that. Like most of the time it felt like a waste of time, but it's not a waste of time if there's a fire. And that's why you have to kind of invest time in the testing and validation piece, which is again something that's kind of abstract from the technology. You can have the best technology in the world, but you got to kind of invest in some of these process pieces to make sure that you're implementing zero trust in the most effective way.
Yes, very well said. And that reminds me of like when I learned about security, is that security is a wheel where you know, test, implement, retest, you know, re-implement, tweak, and you know, it's a constant, never-ending process. It's not just something you do once and you're done. So great points on how to implement zero trust. Let's move on. And I think, Alex, you were talking about, making the lives of the IT employees and the staff across the board easier. And this is a great question for you. How does the implementation of zero trust optimize productivity and cross-functional collaboration?
Yeah, I think like I've been talking about very, very positively, like this is such an opportunity to, and even just I'm thinking about just Murthy bringing up the point of your business priorities, because as an engineer mindset from me, in my personal life, it's really easy to lose track of like what are we at, what are we doing all this for? Like it's really important to be able to get to those priorities, like to do them and actually get stuff done. So I think the way it does it is, again, and I feel like I've already talked about it really, but it's like, instead of having these traditional barriers of we're not on the same VPN, and this is maybe for larger organizations, I'm somewhere far away. I don't have access to the same stuff. I don't have the same abilities as you do. Having a zero trust framework, I think implicitly means that you're a little more agile in how you're connecting people together from that technology perspective. So if you truly have a situation where you are like saying everybody in this group in my Active Directory or my Okta, all of these people can collaborate here or there. If you're doing it in this old school way where if you can't accomplish that without maybe like, I have to go run to my IT admin and have them craft some kind of custom permissions or something, or something like that. If it's like, it's hard to put into words. It's like you're putting together something that's increasing security, but like I have this great optimism that the end implementation is actually an enabler. So I think my answer, to me, I'm a little bit unsatisfied by it, but I think, depending on what you're implementing, it can be positive for productivity.
Absolutely, yeah. And it sounds like there's a lot of tools to help make it, easier for productivity. There's the hard way and there's the easy way. What about your take at Rubrik, Murthy?
Yeah, we have actually a very specific answer on this question. So one of the coolest parts of our platform actually is that not only are we backing up your data, we're actually scanning and indexing it. So we're actually kind of like a mini Google that's actually sees all the information that you are backing up. The consequence of this is that you can actually get insights about, and I mentioned sensitive data before, but there's all kinds of other insights that you can get because we know all the data that you have backed up in the environment. And so even in terms of like spotting threats early on, one of the things about cyber warfare is that sometimes it's not just like a bomb that hits kind of at one time. There's dwell time where there's pieces of malware that get inserted into applications over a period of time. So we can spot those patterns. And because we can spot it, we can drive visibility around it and alerting to a variety of different teams. And so this is, again, going back to how this sort of software approach just generally adds so much value, because there's a lot of intelligence that we can just kind of do behind the scenes and surface insights for not only IT and security teams, but any team. It could be your compliance team if you wanted, or, like there's a whole variety of teams that historically just not even had the visibility into this complex digital landscape you have. So zero trust actually changes the game on that and provides this new level of visibility, which then eliminates a lot of we've all had, those stories of like incident response teams where like you spend half the time just figuring out what the heck's going on, and everybody's pointing fingers at each other, and it's IT's fault. No, it's the security guy's fault. No, it's this guy's fault. Like all of that, can be kind of minimized just by getting everybody on the same page about, hey guys, we already know what's going on in the data. Let's focus on how we remediate and not spend all the time in kind of investigation quarrels.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that brings us on to the next question, which is, well, I think I missed it. Nope. Here we go. Next question. So how is this really different than other things that companies might already have? I mean, companies might be trying to do some sort of principle of least privilege where we don't just give everybody root or admin access. You know, we have a VPN, we have some antivirus stuff, you know, we have a firewall. But how is this really different than, you know, what companies really have in place? Alex?
Yeah, and this is my wheelhouse here for Strong DM. So, you know, being different than a VPN, I mean, really, a lot of people use Strong DM. Our customers use it as a VPN replacement a lot of times. And so, what you'll see with that is we've got a more vigorous identity verification implementation. So it's not really just I've logged in and now I'm on this network. It's really like we're checking with your IDP. You know, there's a lot of magic going on that you know, probably can't talk about without an NDA or whatever. But like, you know, there's more, I would just say it's more complex implementations where it's a lot more intelligent than what you had in the past. And so the other part of that is, you know, our solution, and I'm sure many others out there around Zero Trust are, again, not focused on dumping you on the network. So in particular for our product, we are basically proxying when you're trying to access a database or an SSH. You're basically running our gateway and proxying your, you know, let's say I'm trying to connect to a database. I'm not literally connecting to that database. I am connecting through this gateway. And the gateway is basically deconstructing what I'm doing and sending it along. It's speaking the language of the database, the protocols of all the things we connect to. So in that sense, it's like you're not letting me make some kind of generic connection. We are not letting you do that connection without speaking the correct protocol. So I can't go and like telnet one of the resources or like try to curl it or something. It really wants me to be speaking the database's language. So that's something that is above and beyond a VPN, for example. And then, you know, I think another part of it is that, you know, a VPN, I think I've made this analogy already. It's like the front door of the office. Your badge lets you in, and then you're in. And, you know, this is more like, hey, I change roles on my teams. I change, you know, maybe I don't work at the company anymore. Maybe I'm a new employee. And that access granted and access revocation, it's so fast, you know, it's nearly instant. And it goes as far as like cutting off your connection to a specific resource. So, you know, I think there are some places where it's like you have a VPN and you're saying like, oh, I don't want you to access this database anymore. And how are you going to do that without kicking them off the VPN? Well, maybe you're going to rotate the credentials. Hopefully you're not sharing them, which, I mean, I've seen that. So it becomes this like, how are you going to implement Zero Trust if you're doing it this old way that inherently requires that trust? Like you're having them borrow these database credentials that they can see. So, you know, our product is built around that idea of like definitely going above and beyond a VPN into sort of the next generation, basically.
Thank you. Yeah, for clarifying that. And Murthy, how does Rubrik, you know, differ with Zero Trust, maybe in comparison to some solutions that are already in place?
Yeah, I would say we get this question a lot, and I think, you know, much like Alex, you have to be like really thoughtful about how you think about even, you know, the idea of is it different because I don't think it's necessarily the case that any security solution is bad. More security is always better than less security, right? So it's not so much that there is something that necessarily is being replaced, but it's additional. And so, and particularly additional in the sense of like depth. So like, I'll give you, to be more specific about that, like from a prevention standpoint, right? A lot of companies have technologies that are just in trying to prevent the wrong people getting access to the wrong stuff. So let's take that to another level. Like with Rubrik, you have a copy of the data. Data itself is locked down, fully encrypted. Like, so we just literally have a copy of the data sitting around. God forbid, if you get attacked, you're always going to have a reliable, safe copy of the data that you can use to restore your data and systems. So it's just a whole new level. Instead of just like trying to keep bad guys out, let's think about it from an assumed breach standpoint. From a remediation standpoint now, like what's the state of the art today? The state of the art is like, well, let's try to kind of automate processes, foster collaboration, make better use of, Slack and Microsoft Teams. And there's lots of great tools out there, but let's take that to another level of depth where, like I said before, we're actually providing insights and alerts very, very specifically about what was affected maybe in an attack, what kinds of data are most prone to be attacked because it's, in the wrong place perhaps. And then when you're actually in the middle of a response, like actually giving you some guidance around what specifically needs to be remediated so that you're not doing like a massive recovery that's going to end up taking multiple days, but you can actually focus on just the stuff that was affected. Like there's a lot of insights that can dramatically reduce risk and shorten downtime. And so kind of from a remediation standpoint, that's the depth aspect. Finally, kind of from a monitoring standpoint, again, it's the same point about visibility. A lot of monitoring solutions out there are very, very surface. It's just basically grabbing data from, firewalls and routers and just like putting it in a pretty dashboard. That's helpful, but let's take that to, again, another level of depth. Imagine if you actually knew that there was a file with credit card numbers that's sitting in the wrong place in your infrastructure. If you could get to that level of precision and granularity in the visibility you had, that just enhances your monitoring. And so all of the domains of security still exist. It's not like we're blowing anything up. And I wouldn't even say we're replacing things. I think what Zero Trust is generally doing is providing a deeper level of depth in all of those capabilities.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for clarifying on that. We talked about how Zero Trust is not just a checkbox, and it can be complex to implement in some ways. There are complexities that people should know about. What about challenges? Let's start off with Murthy, back to you. What are the challenges we should be aware of?
So, I think this is related to, some of the stuff we've already, we're starting to kind of converge on some of the ideas here. I think a lot of the challenges, I think come from like kind of going at it alone. So this is where working with vendors is always helpful because not only have we embedded these principles in our own products, but we also have professional services and, people who can kind of help you generally on the journey. So one of the best ways to just hedge against the unknowns and complexities of kind of leaning into this new model, just work with trusted partners because they have the knowledge and what you need to do. I mentioned some of the other like best practices too in terms of like business priority identification, testing and simulation. So there's things like that I think that are just good hedges against challenges. The one thing which, and this is going to sound kind of glib, but it's just like one of the things that has to be said. It's like there's no kind of easy answer to things. Like everything is going to involve some degree of thinking that's very, very custom to your organization. And we have all these like office analogies during today's webcast. So I thought of this funny example. When I was in college, I actually interned at a government lab. I don't know if I should say which one it was, but I was an intern, so I had like talk about least privilege, right? Like I had access to nothing, but my privileges were actually like in terms of my office badge were so low, I actually literally couldn't go to the bathroom. The bathrooms were at a higher level of like permissions than what I had as an intern, which led to some really talk about potential challenges, right? So like that's an example where the policy, like that's not a security problem, that's a policy problem where like you've like so over-indexed on trying to keep things secure, that you've probably inadvertently created other problems. So I mentioned that story as another example of as you're embarking on your kind of zero trust initiatives, like the vendors can help on certain things. There's certain, process and training things you can do, but none of this substitutes for like common sense and actually thinking about what it is you're trying to do, because that's always something that can inadvertently throw off all of the benefits of this kind of stuff.
Great advice. I like that. Alex?
I think it's actually seems like a pretty good idea to lock the interns out of the bathrooms. I think that's zero trust right there. Yeah, I think to return to first the philosophy of it is, I think one of the challenges is changing the mindset of the people in your organization. I guess my little brag here or something. I don't think it's really a brag. I've been doing an online MBA, and one of my recent classes really talked about how you deal with like pushback when in an organization, when you're trying to implement something new and there's pushback on what you're doing. And I don't remember exactly what the class told me to do, but we talked about it. And so you have to take that into consideration. Who knows how good of a student I am. So, but, besides the philosophical stuff, you're obviously, most places are probably going to have a hodgepodge of different tools, legacy systems. You might have these entire systems or processes or just the way you've been doing things where, you think about, how do I do this in more of a zero trust way? And maybe you can't even imagine it. Like, oh, my current process is the opposite of that. And I think my only advice there is just to, stay positive and maybe brainstorm new ideas and probably, don't necessarily jump to the conclusion that like, oh my gosh, we have to re-architect everything. Because, a lot of times you might find there's some clever solutions. Again, seeing what's out there in terms of, obviously, not having to reinvent the wheel. If there are some solutions out there. I know our product is something that when I found Strong DM, it was something that, I had past companies that had already implemented pieces of our product. And when I saw that it existed, I was like, wow, I didn't know this existed. Or like, I was sort of like, this is so cool. This is exactly what we were trying to do, but more of a polished like product that you can sell on a shelf. So maybe that's the other advice of like, hey, if you have some of these challenges implementing zero trust, I'm sure some things you can build yourself, but, definitely have your eyes open because it's, trials are free. So go for it.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think both of you said almost the exact same thing. Find a trusted partner, find a really good product to help make this easier, and then understand, of course, the needs of the business when doing it. And that brings us actually to this second to last question, which I think is also a really good one here. How long does this really take? And how do we know if we're getting, benefits out of the cost that we paid for it? Alex, I know you mentioned ROI calculator. What's your take on this one?
Yeah, it is. It is tough sometimes. But yeah, ROI calculator. It's often it's hard to measure hypotheticals. Like even if you think like saving time isn't easy. Intuitively you would think like, okay, I just multiply the salary by the amount of time saved or something. But a lot of companies, and maybe your company, might not track some of these metrics. Like, if you say, how long does it take for me to request and get access to infrastructure? That could vary, or maybe your company doesn't know. So that can make your, like cost benefit, how long will it take to implement and will we really benefit? And that answer is going to vary a lot. I guess you could say my advice too is if you are evaluating solutions for this question in particular, really get into questions about, how do I maintain this? How long does it take for me to set up? If it looks really complex, it probably is. And then as far as cost benefit tracking, it's, part of it is making sure people are using it and people like it. If you have a solution that people are just, okay, I got this solution, which is going to make me zero trust in this specific way, and then you find that nobody uses it and nobody wants to use it, that might be a problem, because you just bought this wonderful thing that you're not really getting that much out of. So, I mean, it's really, monitoring, and hopefully if you're doing a zero trust solution, remember, one of the pillars of it is that monitoring piece. So you should actually be able to see results in some way, because that's kind of one of the philosophical parts of it. You're seeing all that activity now. So hey, I know how long this is taking people, because I can watch everything they're doing in my network now. So yeah, that's a lot of thoughts.
Okay, great advice. Murthy?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I think I'm almost just doing a +1 to Alex. I think it's really understanding, like, when we talk about important information services, how important is it? What is the value of, if a piece of data or if an application got compromised? How bad is that to your business? Like, just measure it. I know it's difficult to do sometimes, because it's like trying to measure a bad thing that may never happen, but that's the only way you can get around kind of that ROI argument. Like, what is impact look like to you, given the regulatory landscape you face, given the way your business operates, the consumers and partners that rely on you? What is the cost of a day of downtime? It's, Alex is right. It's very difficult to put a dollar value on time, but you kind of have to crunch a way around it and figure it out, because in practice, if you don't have zero trust, and that means something gets compromised and you have to, it takes days or weeks to remediate, you're going to face that cost. Like, somehow that is going to implement. So it's you trying to actually get ahead of that and think about that financial impact in a more proactive way. And so, yeah, it's exactly like Alex said. Like, it's a difficult exercise, but it's one that almost surely has positive ROI. It's just kind of understanding what the I and the R are, and then just do it in bits and pieces. I mean, we always say this with any kind of technology initiative. It's not like you start from zero and you go to zero trust. It's not zero to zero trust. There's sort of in between milestones you can kind of go through that enable you to get bits of the return earlier, so that it helps to justify future investments as well.
That's a good point, that you can implement it in, kind of a scale in method. I know we're starting to run out of time here in our PanelCast event. I want to get to kind of 2 final questions before we wrap up. And, the first one, I know we've talked about a rubric and strong DM kind of throughout the event here, but, specifically, I'll start with you, Murthy. How can rubric help companies who are interested in implementing zero trust?
Absolutely. So, I mean, it's fairly simple, that the value proposition for the company. We want to help organizations keep their information assets safe and make it really fast, easy, safe, and confident to recover. So we lean into the philosophy that you should assume breach, and that we want to help organizations be able to recover from attacks as quickly, safely, confidently as possible. So we have a whole bunch of solutions, which I kind of alluded to throughout the webcast, but fundamentally, that's kind of how we help with this area.
Excellent. And Alex, over at Strong DM, how can companies utilize Strong DM to implement zero trust?
I'm tempted to come up with a radio voice to start doing my sales pitch, but I don't know if I'm going to get in trouble for that. But like I've been saying a million times, Strong DM, it is the people first infrastructure access platform. So we extend, at a fundamental level, we extend your identity provider to give your employees access to infrastructure without that credential sprawl. So they can access infrastructure in a very zero trust way, and they're not left with credentials. We make that granular access work in real time for onboarding, offboarding, temporary access. that can happen through all kinds of ways, like our API or Slack. We can even do like pager duty on call. Like if you're on call, you get access. contracts, projects, that we make a lot of that stuff easy. We can take a wide breadth of resources and, with all these different authentication methods that aren't very zero trusty. I was talking earlier about, logging into databases or logging into maybe something legacy you have. Maybe you have a web application that's just an internal business application and you've been just sharing a username and password. Like, that's stuff that we can handle. And we can really, and I was also talking about, don't assume that, all this legacy stuff you have, you're like, oh my gosh, I have to re-architect it. Well, maybe if it's not your business priority, you can just drop strong DM right in front of it and you're all set. You're all, you've just increased your security posture just almost instantly. So, and like I've mentioned, the reason we say we're people first is that we do prioritize productivity of the employees. So our product, it emphasizes the fact that you're still using all your developers like native tooling, so it's, and then also on the administration side, it's very simple to deploy. We do it all the time on we'll jump on one call with a prospect and we'll have something basic set up on that same call. So, I think that's why I'm so optimistic about zero trust. Hey, it doesn't have to be complex because I've seen this product that is not complex, and it's very freeing for a lot of our customers. So we can definitely help you. And I wish I had a radio voice, but that's what I got.
Awesome. All right. Well, it's been a real pleasure. I enjoyed, chatting with you both. I learned a lot. I know the audience did as well. Alex, Murthy, thank you so much for being on the PanelCast today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, thank you to everyone out there in the audience for joining us on the event today. Before we go, I want to announce the winner of our Amazon $300 gift card. This is going to Rodney Stauffer from Pennsylvania. Congratulations. We'll reach out to you. And of course, thank you to our friends at Rubrik and StrongDM for supporting us on the event today. Check out the handouts tab and their respective websites for additional information. We'll see you next time. Have a great day. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.